My name is Chuck Sussman. Today is Tuesday, January 28th, 2003. I am here to interview Safta VHS, who is a survivor of the Nazi Holocaust. I'm doing this under the auspices of the Holocaust Documentation and Education Center, Incorporated. The purpose of this interview is to add to the oral history of the Holocaust, so that through this living memorial, future generations will know what happened, and with this knowledge, we hope to prevent any such occurrence in the future. Thank you very much for joining us this morning, Ms. VHS. May I call you Safta?
Yes.
Thank you. Let's begin talking about the pre-war time. First, would you please spell your name?
S-T-E-F-A. Marcus, M-A-R-K-U-S-C. My maiden name is Edelist, E-D-E-L-I-S-T.
Okay, let's talk about the town from which you came. But first, please tell me, where were you born?
I was born in Poland, Częstochowa,
And what was your birth date?
May 4th, 1925.
Now, let's talk about the pre-war years. Where did you grow up?
I come from a family of 5 girls.
Mm-hmm.
I was the middle one, and very Orthodox family.
What city did you grow up in? What was the?
Częstochowa.
Could you spell that for me, please, if you don't mind?
C-H-E-N-S-T-C-H-O-W-A, Częstochowa.
And where was that located in Poland?
Central Poland, it's near the German border.
About how far from Warsaw?
Oh, far from Warsaw,
Yeah.
very far. Yeah.
Any other large cities near Częstochowa?
No, just the smaller cities like Sosnowiec, Katowice, Będzin. This was around.
In that area.
Yeah.
And about how many people lived in Częstochowa?
About 120,000, but 30,000 Jews.
And about 30,000 Jews. And how did most of the people in that city earn their living?
Everything. They did everything. There were merchants and workers. And my father had a little grocery store.
Was there anything special that that area was noted for?
Where we lived in that section, there were butchers. And most people were like concentrated in part of the city, the Jewish people.
They're all in
Weren't
one area.
spread out. Some of them spread out, but not too many.
Okay, but were there many? Was there any special industry in that city that was noted for?
No.
So your father ran a grocery store.
A little, yeah.
He owned the store.
Yeah.
How did most of the Jews earn their living?
By business. Some of them were, poor, and some of them were a little more comfortable. They had business.
Now, let's talk about your family and how your family lived in Częstochowa during the early pre-war years. Now, you started to say before that you were the middle child of how many?
Five girls.
All girls, okay.
All girls.
And what were the names of your sisters?
The oldest one is Hannah. She lives in New York. My second one is Manya, and she lives in New York. And I'm the next one, Stefa. And then was Rivka and Hannah.
And what were your parents' names?
Hanoch,
And what was your mother's maiden name?
Woźnica.
Was she from that same area?
3 kilometers away from in a small town.
And your father's name?
My father's name was Hanoch,
Yeah.
Edelist, and my mother's name was Fabian,
And,
Woźnica.
and about when were they married?
Must have been like in 1915. No, maybe before that. I don't know. I I don't know.
But
My sister was 20 years old when the war broke out. So it was 1939,
Yeah.
so maybe around in the teens. Exactly.
Stefan, how far were you able to go in your schooling?
I finished my 7th grade. That was public school, grade school. That was this to the war. Till 1939, I finished my school.
The schooling was like a general school?
Yes.
No, no specialties?
Well, first we were together with the non-Jewish, and then it was just Jewish kids. And we weren't so, we used to be afraid to go at night because they knew that we Jewish, they'd throw stones on us. So if we had to take the second session, my parents weren't too happy about it. Excuse me. They weren't too happy about it, but we did what we did. And I didn't look like Jews. I don't know how Jewish kids are supposed to look, but they always said I was blonde and I didn't look like Jewish. So I had a lot of non-Jewish friends. But I didn't live far from school. So the winter time we walked, nobody took buses.
Let me ask you a question. Did that anti-Semitism that started to show, was that before the war started or after?
Oh, sure, it was always, this was a very anti-Semitic city. When they had these, this was with the Madonna, the Black Madonna. And when they used to come in from other cities, they used to sing like songs, "We want the city without Jews."
Now, the Black Madonna was a Christian symbol that was,
Yes.
it was located in your city?
In the city, but in a park. And there were signs for dogs and Jews are not allowed to come in there.
And that was even before the war started?
Before.
What was the Black Madonna? Was it a statue, a relic?
Statue with the diamond, the eyes. But my father was a very, he wanted us to know everything. So he used to go with us. And we used to go up and see, because it was a very big building. And we used to go up and see, he used to sit in the other, there were 2 parks. One wasn't allowed to go in. But as kids, we used to go from school to visit. So my father took us, we should see what's about. And he didn't go up because he was a very Orthodox man. So he was sitting and waiting for us in the other park. There was an old park and a new park. The old park we were allowed to go in.
What was the significance of this Black Madonna?
A holy Madonna that they used to come and march for miles and miles. They used to come from Krakow, from Warsaw. They used to walk to come to her.
Did that, do you think that added to the anti-Semitism that you experienced?
I do think so, because that's what they used to say. That's why it's an anti-Semitic. I remember 2 pogroms in Częstochowa.
Could you tell me about that?
Yes, it was in 1935. A Jewish guy had a fight with a Gentile, and I don't know, the Jewish guy cut off his head. And this was a pogrom. I remember they walked in and they was shouting and breaking windows, and it was a scary thing. And then there was another one, like 1938. I don't know what the cause was about that, but I remember them. I remember them well.
So the Poles came through the city in the Jewish area?
Sure.
Let's talk about the time that, before that, you say your father was Orthodox. Did you or your family belong to any Jewish organizations?
Sure. My father, the Aguda, the organization, and my father had his shul in our building. There was a big building, very tenant, and he had his shul. He used to go in the morning, put up the stove, it should be warm when we come in. We were very involved in the Jewish, we used to go to the Beis Yankiv, Beit Yaakov. This was like a Jewish school, a Hebrew school. All the kids, we used to go after school in the afternoon, we used to go, we learned Jewish. I learned how to daven. And we used to daven at the Saturday, Friday night, just like boys.
Yeah.
My father didn't know the
Very,
difference.
very progressive.
Yes, didn't know the difference between girls and boys.
Did you belong to any Zionist organizations?
No, no, not that.
Yeah. Just they were all centered around the synagogue.
Right. And my parents, in the 1919, I think, they wanted to go to Israel, and they were pulled back.
What happened?
I don't know, they went as far as Austria, and then they came back. My older sister was the only child, but they went with them. And they were pulled back, they wouldn't let them go or whatever. I never knew the story, I just know that they wanted to go. And we had like a vocational school, so my father went to learn how to be a carpenter, because he figured he goes to Israel, he has to have a trade.
Yeah.
So he went there, but they came back and they settled back in Częstochowa.
Well, let's talk about the time that Hitler was on the rise to power in Europe, and before the war came to Poland, and before your town was occupied. During those pre-war years, you were a teenager. What did you hear about what was happening in Germany?
We didn't even have a radio, but a neighbor of ours had a radio. And he never knew what they were talking about because he didn't understand Polish. So he used to call the kids in, and we should listen and explain to him. So then we came home and we told my father the story, that they after the Jews, and they tried to chase him out from school in Germany. We heard the stories what's going on at, I don't know, 35, 37, 38.
You heard about Kristallnacht?
We heard about it, not on television and the radio, but we heard about it.
What did you think about that?
Well, I don't know. We didn't think it's going to come to us. We didn't think about it.
How did your everyday life change as Hitler was on the rise to power in Europe before he invaded Poland?
It didn't change. It didn't. Like everything else, we didn't think we were going to be involved in that.
So, any of your family members wanted to leave at that time to go anywhere?
No.
Okay, then let's talk now about the time of the occupation of the Nazis. Now, let's talk about the early days before the ghetto period. Where were you living when the war broke out, September 1st, 19?
They came in.
Well, let me ask you, Częstochowa is how close to the German border?
It was very close. We were like the first one occupied.
Now, what happened in your town between the time the war started and the Nazi occupation? That was a period you said of about 3 days.
Right.
All right, tell me what happened then.
They came in on a Friday.
No, but before they came in, you heard the war had started.
Yeah, we had the war started, but we didn't know they didn't come to any other place. The first thing was our city.
Yeah,
Where
okay.
they marched in. And they came in on a Friday in September.
Well, what was the date? Do you remember?
I think it was September 3rd.
Okay.
I'm not sure. And they came in, and that was on a Friday. And soon they came in, they start shooting.
Well, let me get back up just a bit. Came in on Friday in the morning? It was early in the day?
Morning. We woke up and we heard shooting and screaming. And right away they walked in like the wild animals. And my father came home from davening from shul, and he said, you know what, we're in the war now. And took from Friday and Saturday, and they just went on a wild rampage. They walked into our houses and they were beating up and just like wild animals. And then it was Monday, and this was the bloody Monday in Częstochowa. They just, anybody walked in the street, they were shooting. And I said to my oldest sister, I said, you know, Manya, let's go. They're selling soap or whatever in a wholesale place. And we both went. And we got there, and it was just like, we didn't know what happened. They closed us in the store, and we couldn't get out. A few hours later, they took us into a cathedral. It was a big cathedral right around there, and we couldn't go home. So we were there for 2 days.
How old were you at that time, Steph?
I was 14. It
Yeah.
was 1939.
Yeah. And your sister was how old?
And my sister was 14, so she was 17, 18. And after 2 days, they let us go. And we ran home, and we came home. The doors are open, everything is on the floor, and my mother is up there, nobody is there. So we had like a vocational school across the yard, and we saw a fire there. So we both went, and we found our mother with the two younger sisters and my older sister. They were clinching to each other. We said, "Where is father? He's not around." So after a while, and they just threw people into the fire. They just threw them in. And they were standing in a corner, and we were together, and then they said, "Everybody go home." We came into the apartment, and the father wasn't here.
Tell me about throwing people in the fire. How did that happen?
They just picked people random, whoever they wanted.
There was a fire. Was it in the courtyard or in the school?
In the courtyard.
Yeah.
In the courtyard. And we didn't know who was going to be next. But then after a while, they stopped and they said, "Go home, everybody go home."
Did they pick anyone special?
No, there wasn't anybody special.
How many people?
A lot.
The people died. Big fire.
Yeah, big fire.
Yeah.
And whoever didn't die in the fire, they was just shooting with the guns. And then we went home.
Did people try and run away? Were they?
No, you couldn't run.
Yeah.
There was no place where to run.
Who was doing this? The Nazi soldiers?
Nazi soldiers came in, they wiped. And then we came home, my father wasn't home, and we didn't know where to go. We were afraid to go out. On the way going home, we just stepped on dead people. Because whoever was in the street, they were shooting them. And we just looked if we see our father, if we see somebody. Well, we knew this is people from the neighborhood. And then after 2 days, we came out of the cathedral, my father went in, but we didn't see him. And then 2 days later, he came home. And since then, life wasn't life.
Let me find something out. This fire was outside a cathedral? No, this is in the
Father
church.
was in the vocational school.
In the school, okay.
Yeah, this was away from
Yeah.
the cathedral.
Okay.
And he came home, and he was a man with a beard, very proud of it. And he was afraid to go out, because once they saw with a beard, they grabbed him and they hit him. Not just him, any
Yeah.
of them. And he came home, and we never closed the door, because no use closing the doors. They just came in. We lived in a building right before the yard, so it was close to the street. So every time they came in with their boots, they opened the doors. And we were kids. I always liked to sleep by myself, and there wasn't bedrooms. So I had my bed in the kitchen. I opened like a bed. But at that time, I just didn't want it. I want to be with everybody. I was afraid. And that,
What did your father tell you had happened to him for those 2 days?
well, they were sitting there, no food, no drink, no nothing. They didn't do anything to them. They just was holding them
They held him at the cathedral?
in the cathedral. They were holding them.
All Jewish men?
Yeah, all Jewish.
What was your first impression when you saw the Nazis when they came? What was your first thought?
Afraid, very afraid.
Remember what kind of uniforms they had?
Oh, sure, the brown with the red, the swastikas, and just the white faces, and the boots. Till this day, if I see on television, if I see their boots, it just scares me. Because I know they were kicking people from all sides.
How did the non-Jewish people in your city react to these actions against the Jews?
Not very well. I had a lot of non-Jewish friends. And when the Nazis came in, they pointed the finger. This is a Jewish girl. So I stayed away from them.
But they were not any help at all?
No. Then I had some, and they were helpful. Later on, they were helping me. They used to bring me something, not much. Didn't trust them too much.
Did the government, the city government or the national government do anything to try and help at that point?
No.
Did the Germans passed new laws at that time about Jews.
Yes.
Could you tell me about that?
There are certain times, like you're allowed to go out from, let's say, 8 o'clock till 4 o'clock in the afternoon.
Mm-hmm.
No evening walking, no evening going out. And then they made a ghetto.
Oh, before we got to that.
Yeah.
So you had curfew regulations.
Yeah, curfew. And we were afraid to get out anyway.
Yeah.
We were afraid. If my father wants to go out with the kids, we used to go with him because we were afraid. Every time he walked out, they used to grab his beard, they used to kick him. So we used to go with him.
What happened to his store at that time?
Nothing. He just liquidated everything.
Yeah. Now, let's start talking now about how long did this period last before they started the ghetto?
42. It was like till, I don't know, maybe a year.
So a year before the ghetto was formed.
Yes.
How did
But
you?
it was a ghetto anyway, because all the Jewish people, they came in to live in one area.
There was no gate, no fence around it at that
No,
point. You
then
could
they
still
did.
come and go.
We come and go, but we didn't go far away from our sections.
How did you live? How did you get food and money?
We had a bakery on our yard.
Mm-hmm.
And in order we should have what to eat, first of all, the baker, if he baked the bread, they made like a little window in the gate in our house.
Mm-hmm.
So he had to sell the bread, so he sliced it like pieces. And people came, and they were pushing, but in order for us to have bread, he used to take like, 30, 40 breads and put in our house. And I went with my sister during the morning to distribute them to people. So this way we had our bread, and then in the afternoon I used to go with her to collect the money because some people had money. And that's how we had bread in the house.
So you bartered the delivery service for the bread. Did he sold the bread? I mean, he
Yes,
yeah, that was
yes.
he was a baker. Was that bakery?
He wasn't allowed to sell it in the bakery,
Oh, okay.
only to give out to the people. So
Okay.
he came to us, he knew I was very fast.
Yeah.
So he knew my sister was afraid to go. I said, no, you have to go with me. So we took like a sack with 3 or 4 breads. We went to the people, and then in the afternoon I went to collect the money. He got the money, we got the bread.
So he was baking bread. He was a baker? I mean, was that
Yes.
bakery in business before the Nazi
Yes,
occupation?
Yes. This is from generations.
Yeah.
His wife's parents had a bakery.
Okay. Now, let's talk about the beginning of the ghetto. Did you have to leave your apartment when the ghetto opened?
No, we were in the section where
Yeah.
we stayed there. We were in the section where we stayed.
And now let's talk about how they established. How did you learn that you were going to all have to live in this ghetto?
Not very well. First of all, they came in and they announced that all the force and gold has to be put in the middle of the yard. My mother had a Persian coat, and she never wore it because she was holding on for a truth of her head, one of her daughters. So she had like a fake coat, so she was wearing. The minute they announced, she was the first one with that coat under the yard.
Yeah.
And we cried. And then we had the kids, we had coats with the little 4 colors. She ripped them all off. She said, I'm afraid, I don't want any business with them. So she threw everything on there. A lot of people did that.
What else did they look for? Gold? Did anyone have gold?
Yeah, they came in and they rampaged the whole house.
Yeah.
You know, they looked, I don't know what they looked, just to make us worry and nervous. And we were kids. We were playing around and we said, oh, you fat, it's going to be a fat soap, because we know that they're making soap from us. When they take us, we knew about the concentration camp, not the camps, about the Auschwitz and all, because we knew that they were building it. We knew, we were smart, we knew they were building it. So we used to say, oh, from you they're gonna make fat soap with musk, you know. We used to play and then
Yeah.
talk about it, like this is a game.
How did you find out about the building of the concentration camps?
Well, like I said, the radio,
Yeah.
I don't know, there were people going and coming. There was always young guys, and they
Yeah.
were all around, and they were coming and going and telling us the story, and telling us that they're building. But, you know, you don't believe these things. You don't want to believe them.
Now, so you stayed in your apartment.
Yes.
And what did they do then to separate the ghetto from the rest of the city? Did they build any walls or fences?
There were fences.
Yeah.
There were fences.
What kind of fences were they?
Like wire fences, you know, like.
Was it like barbed wire or just plain
Yeah,
wire?
no, not heavy. They knew we were not going to go anywhere.
Yeah.
And my father was anemic, he was sick, so I took off we were wearing armbands.
When did they start the armbands?
Right after they came in. Not long. We armbands and like a little Jewish star the front on a little string. And I took off my armband and I went out and I bought a few things for my father, a candy, I don't know, something. And when I came back, he asked me, where'd you got this? I said, oh, this one came and she brought it to the, because I was brave.
Yeah.
I wasn't afraid, I really wasn't afraid. But I was just afraid of their boots and their faces. But to walk, I put on a kerchief and I walk. Like,
What was the penalty if you were found without a star?
they were killing you. They kill you. And I always used to say, I'm young, maybe they are not going to do that.
Now, so now you were now separated from the rest of the city.
Yeah,
How did you continued to work for the baker, so you had some food?
we had some food.
How long did they force you to, what was the date, the date that they actually announced the ghetto? Do you remember?
It was 1942. 1942.
That was the starting of the ghetto?
Yeah.
Yeah.
1942. I don't remember the
Yeah.
dates too much.
Right now, when you,
It wasn't the beginning of 1942.
okay. When you first entered, now you were living in this segregated area, the ghetto, did they have gates to let people in and out?
Yeah.
And were there guards at the gates?
No, no guards.
Yeah.
They knew that nobody's going to escape. Nobody's going to go anywhere.
All right, now let's talk about the food. You've had that pretty well covered. Was water available readily?
Yeah.
Heat for your apartment?
Not really. Not really.
Did you have your own stove, or?
Yeah, we had the stove with coal and wood. So whatever was left, whatever we had, we used.
How about sleeping accommodations?
Well, we all piled in one room.
Did you have to share your apartment with anyone else?
No.
Was electricity available at that?
Yeah.
And normal sanitation, you had,
No. I had my mother's sister lived like 3 kilometers out of the city. So then when the ghetto was, they came in to stay with us. So they stayed with us for a while, and they stayed somewhere else. You know, we spread out.
how about healthcare? Were there doctors in the ghetto? Or?
Yeah, the doctors from Jewish doctors from way back. I don't remember anybody being sick. I don't remember anybody. I just see now sick people.
Now, tell me something about the work. So now you were there. Did the Nazis put you to work in the ghetto?
Yeah,
Okay, well, tell me about that.
we were working on the railroad. We worked to dig, you know, the like ditches.
On either side of the railroad track?
Yes, right. And one time I was working there, and this was already 1942, right? So I worked there, and we didn't know that they're going to take us. No, this was later. That's all right.
So you're doing that work. How about your mother and father? Were they working?
If they called my father to work, we used to work, the kids. So we signed in his name, but we rent.
Yeah.
That he shouldn't go.
His health was
The
not?
youngest one stayed home, the oldest
Yeah.
one, we went out.
Was his health all right, or he was not well?
He was anemic, he was sick, he was so pale. You know, worry about the kids, worry about everything.
Now, so you were able to get in and out of the ghetto. Did you go in like a work detail, or did you just have to walk out the gate and go where you was?
They took us. They took us in groups,
So,
not by ourselves.
Yeah.
They took us in groups.
did they? How did you know to get to this group? Did they call people out?
They called. This street is going today, the other street is going the other day.
So it went by streets.
Oh, they
Yeah.
were very organized.
What rules were established by the Nazis for the operation of the ghetto? You know, any special regulations that you had? Did you have curfew and stuff like that?
There were signs, if we find you in the street after the hours, we kill you. There were signs, whatever they wanted to put up. They didn't want to see us, just in bunches.
Now, how did the Jewish community organize to help itself in the ghetto?
Not much. Couldn't do much
Yeah.
about it. Couldn't do much about it.
Did they have a Jewish government, a Judenrat, in that ghetto?
No.
Was there more than one ghetto in Czestochowa?
Yes. This was the big ghetto where we were. Then 1942, it was the September. 1942 in September, they was Sukkot, and my father said every time a holiday he used to say L'Shana Haba b'Yerushalayim. This time he said we should all be together next week. We knew it's coming. And this was the first day of Sukkot in 1942. And sure enough, Halamoid Sukkot, they took by strips. This was ready to go to concentration camp and to go to, to the gas chambers. So my father said he's not going anywhere. He called us, he's not going. He made himself a bunker in the house, took away some floor woods, and he said he's going to go down with the two younger ones. He said, you three older ones, you okay. They don't need us. And then they called out that day that our street is going, And my father with my mother, with two sisters, they went down to the bunker. And before he closed that gate, that floor, I start crying because everybody got a knapsack and a little ring, a little watch, and I start crying. He said, you can't go with us because they need you. You're a big girl and they need you for work. They don't need us. And I cried and I was fighting with him. And he just laughed up and we walked out. And when we walked out, they took us and there were lines, like one goes left and one goes right. For living is right, for left is concentration camp, or the gas chamber.
Did you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was just the gas chamber. So.
Did you know what the difference was at that time? The dividing, you knew.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, we knew. We were smart.
Yeah.
We followed. And I went with my two older sisters, and we went to the right. So we okay. And my friend with her parents, and she came with us, and her parents went to the left, and her mother yelled out, please, and take care of her. And we were together for most of the time. And then they put us in a small ghetto. They cleaned out the city. The city was clean of Jews. And they put us in a small ghetto.
In the same city, in Czestochowa.
They concentrate like let's say 3 streets. Wasn't that many people, and they took us to work. And we went to work to clean up after the people what they took out, and we still found food on the table.
Let me ask you a question. When they took the people, they took them in the streets and then they marched them off to where they go, the railroad station.
Right.
Okay.
They put
Oh,
them
I'm
in
sorry.
these
Yeah.
cattle cars.
Yeah.
And we worked in one of these places and we cleaned up, and I went down with a bundle with whatever they said, separate, and if you didn't separate, they killed you. So I went down and we were near a railroad and a cattle car passed by and I thought I'm going to see my parents. So I had a piece of bread in my pocket. So I went there and I was short, so I wanted to climb up. And one of the Germans, a young guy, he picked me up. And my sister started crying. She thought he's going to throw me into them. And he picked me up and I gave a piece of bread to a man. And he gave me a watch. He said, listen kid, I don't need that. And I thank you for the piece of bread. This was the most horrible thing to see, how they were bunched up, kids crying, babies crying. And I walked away. And then I said to my sister, I said, look what he gave me. What am I going to do with that? I have no place where to hold that thing. She said, put it in the pocket, don't worry about it. And then we worked for a while to clean up after the people.
Why do you think that German helped you?
I don't know. It just, I didn't even remember. My sister reminded me that years later. I didn't even remember because I was so bitter and so afraid of that whole thing. I didn't even remember what was. But my sister said, you remember he picked you up, a young guy, and he put you up, and he said, okay, give it to them, give it. And I had like a cup with water, and I gave it to them because there wasn't much water. And then we worked to clean up, and there was no water there. They closed up the water. So we found in a corner 2 bottles of, it was like ether, but in a liquid. And it smelled like wine. So we were a few girls, we wanted to drink, so we drank. And and we had to go from there to the ghetto. I had no shoes, I had a pair of white shoes with high heels, a young kid, and it was winter time. And we walked on the way, I took off the shoes and I threw them, I don't know, probably to somebody in their head, I don't know. And on the way, till we got to the ghetto, we all stretched out in the street because we were like drunk, I don't know. And I was hallucinating. I saw my parents, I saw my sisters, and I yelled to my sister, I said, take him in, don't leave him at the door. And I don't know, after 2 days, about 20, a doctor came, he gave us something. We were a whole bunch of girls. We drank.
Now,
I think they did that on purpose.
did your father get out of the ghetto? Was he taken, or do you ever know what happened?
2 days later, after they got down to the bunker, 2 days later, the police came and they called out with loudspeakers that everything is safe, they should come out. They came out and they were taking, because there was a guy who lived on our block, and he saw them taking them out with the hands up, and they were taken to Treblinka. They perished there.
None survived.
My parents with 2 younger sisters. One was 10, one was 8 or 9.
Were there Jewish police in that ghetto?
Yes.
Tell me something about them.
Everybody was fighting for their life. So comes to it that everybody is selfish. They thought they're going to do things and they're going to survive, but they didn't. So then when they, in the ghetto, in the small ghetto, they were building the concentration camp. This was an ammunition factory. So like my husband was the first one there, he was taking to work there. But we were in that small ghetto till January 43.
What were some of the duties of the Jewish police?
Take out the people, I don't know, they didn't do much. They just wanted to live and they thought they're going to be the ones surviving. So they did what they were told to do.
How did they treat?
Beat up people, to call out people. People were hiding in cellars, whatever, they called them out.
Did you know any of these Jewish police?
No, not really.
No. So the big ghetto had, you had said, about 30,000 people, or maybe more.
Not even 30,000. Yeah, maybe more because people came in from little towns.
Yeah. And now the small ghetto, big ghetto, is all liquidated.
Yeah,
now the small
ghetto has like 3 streets. Just,
yeah. But how many people do you think were in there?
I don't know. No, not a lot. Not a lot. So in 1943 in January, they liquidated the small ghetto.
Oh, before we get to that, let me just ask a couple of questions about life in the ghetto itself. Uh, Did people, did people hold services, religious observances at all in the ghetto?
No, no.
Was there any education for the children?
No,
or-
no. There was no children. In
Yeah.
the small ghetto, there were no children.
How about in the big ghetto before they divided?
No, there wasn't. We were afraid to walk in the streets.
Any cultural activities?
No,
Nothing?
no, nothing like that.
Okay. So, were there any Christians in the ghettos?
No, not that I know.
Were there any underground organizations or resistance
No,
groups
not-
in the ghetto?
not by us.
Were there any individual acts of resistance or sabotage during that ghetto period?
No, I don't remember.
Now, let's talk about now, they liquidate the small ghetto and they start, you said, a concentration camp to
Right.
do what?
So they took us to the concentration camp,
Where was that located?
like 2 miles out of the city. Big factory, ammunition factory.
Was the factory there before or was it a new factory?
No, everything was built.
Yeah.
And they had no barracks yet. So they put us in like 800 women, girls, in a room, like 3 piles of straw. That's how we were sleeping. One night, few of these Germans, the young ones, this was the Ukrainians, and they came in, every girl between 12 and 14 should pick up their hand. They took up a few girls, and I was hiding behind my sister, a few girls, and they raped them.
Right there in that building?
Right there. Right there.
Germans did nothing? No.
Nah. And when we first came into the ghetto, to the concentration camp, they wanted to show us that one shouldn't steal from the other. So they took a young girl, about, I don't know, 16 years old, beautiful blonde, and they put her on a podium, and they said, that's what's going to happen. And this was 5 o'clock in the morning in January. And they called us, all was on alarm. Everybody has to stay out and see what's going to be. And if you're going to steal from each other, or you're going to fight with each other, that's what's going to happen. And they were, and she was hung,
Just like that?
just like that.
Had she stolen or done anything?
Nothing,
Just
nothing.
as an example?
Just an example of what's going to happen to us if we do that. And
Who did that, the Germans or the Ukrainians?
I don't know. Didn't matter. They all
Yeah,
look like
yeah,
one,
yeah.
were like the same thing. And then they built the barracks, and we were like 600 women in one barrack, men separate, women separate, 600 in one barrack. It was like 3-story high.
At that time, Stefan, did you hear of what was going on and any idea of what was happening in the rest of Europe? You know, the progress of the war, or what was happening to Jews or other people?
We knew that they're taking the Jews to the gas chambers. We knew that. That we knew.
Were there anyone trying to escape from the ghetto that you knew of?
Yeah, there was a few young guys.
Yeah.
There was even one who escaped from Treblinka. He's not alive anymore,
Yeah.
Mr. Bomba. He was in Russia. And there was a few. There was a few, but not too many. Not too many.
Any suicide attempts in the ghetto, in this concentration camp? Did you know?
I don't know. I don't know. I was so busy with myself. And at night when we went, so they built the barracks and they put us in the barracks. And every night I went to sleep. I said, I wish I wouldn't get up. And my sister used to say, if you could do something for yourself, do something for me too. That was the good night. The restrooms were outside, but we were afraid to go out.
Was there heat in the barracks?
No, there was like a stove with no coals,
Yeah.
no nothing.
No.
No.
Were you wearing your regular clothes that you had before?
We had no clothes.
Yeah.
I developed like boils, like with pus from probably not eating right.
Yeah.
And in Europe, in Poland, we had like school uniforms, like a black dress with buttons. That's what I was left with for the winter, and I had a pair of a wooden sole with a little strap. And the showers were running day and night. Just if inspection come in, they should know about it, that we could be clean. But they wouldn't let you in. And I just didn't care, because this was good for me. So I ran in. We had like in between, I worked in a ammunition factory. When we came into the ammunition factory, they showed me I have 3 machines to take care of them. A little Jewish girl, what do I know about machines? And I started crying, and they said, anything goes wrong, it's sabotage, we're gonna kill you. And I started crying, and there was a guy, a neighbor of ours, and he was in charge of them. And he came over and he kissed me, he said, don't cry, anything is wrong, just look for me. So that was a little relief.
Well, what sort of work did you do? What kind of machines did you operate? What did they do?
We cleaned them, you know, when they put the ammunition in,
Yeah.
And we had watchdogs around us.
How were the conditions in the factory? How was the food?
I passed by in the morning, we went from the barracks. I had night shift or day shift. The day shift, I was okay, but the night shift, I was a young kid, I wanted to go to sleep. So one night I was sitting by the machine, and I dozed off, and that, the one who took care of the Meister, they called him, he was wearing a white coat, and there were big windows, and he was walking down, and I dozed off, and he came in, and he saw that from the outside. And he smacked my face on all sides. He said, you're not supposed to sleep here. This is work.
Was he he was a German who worked for the...
And one of them, somebody threw a piece of paper on the floor. And I passed by, and he saw that. He said, I did. There was no way to say I didn't, because he made up his mind I did that. And then and we were already in concentration camp. And they decided they don't want any educated people. So they took the lawyers and doctors and police, and they piled them up like bricks, and they just burned them to death. Just to death.
Well, these are the people who were working in the factory, who were educated?
They didn't want any educated people.
Yeah.
And the police who helped them out, they were one of them too.
They just, how did they do? They just laid them on the ground?
Just laid them like
They were alive?
yeah,
Yeah.
sure.
And how did they light them? What did they do?
Mhm.
What did they use? Gasoline or?
I don't know. You know, certain things
Yeah.
you didn't want to see it. And then we had appeals every morning, like in the winter time, and not dressed. And I used to go for my sister, for my older sister, like for 6 months. I was fast and I was short, and I ran and I stood there, and they counted me, everything was okay. Well, it was already towards the end. I just didn't want anymore. I said, I'm not going, I'm staying in the barrack. If they come and they kill me, I don't care anymore. I was all swollen, and I said, forget it. My sister, well, she wasn't as fast as I was, and she got caught. And they gave her 15 lashes on her back. And we had nights, because there was no water. They said cold water. Who had cold water? So I opened the door and took a piece of ice and I put on.
Now what happened? She answered for herself and then ran and answered for you?
I don't know if she was first for me. I did. I used to do that for both.
Yeah.
But she
You would
was
run
the-
behind the line and then come here?
And as long as they had 50 or 60 or whatever, they didn't care. But she came a little late. I don't know if Hess was early or mine, I don't remember that. But that's what happened. And
Who administered the lashing? Who did that?
the SS, these German,
Did they have capos in this camp?
yeah, but they weren't so, we had like managers but not real couples. We had some German women, and they were rough, but they weren't too bad. As I understand, some other places, we had like a Jewish couple after the war. The Jewish people killed him. During the war, they had no way to do
Yeah.
that. So he got killed.
Well, how did he treat his fellow prisoners?
Yeah. he didn't treat them very nice, that's why.
Yeah.
We had like a little place, you know, a doctor, a nurse. And when I had these boils just before, and I just couldn't walk, so I went in, and they bandaged me with paper bandages. So the skin was so thin that every place where the bandage ended, I was bleeding. And it took maybe a few days. I was in the hospital, and they said everybody has to come out. So my sister threw in my clothes, and I came into the place where I work. And there was about 8 or 10 girls, and we were sitting on little like boxes and waiting. They should call us out because our truck was outside to take these people away, the sick people. And every time that German came, and I don't know, my husband worked for him, he cleaned his boots, I don't know, he painted for him. And every time he came and he said, this one, and I got up, he said, not you. I was the only one left. I have some friends and they can't believe that. They were sitting and working and they saw me sitting such a navish, and I was the only one left. There were 2 sisters, they shaved their heads, and I was the only one left.
When they took them, what did they do with them?
They put them on a truck and they shot them. I had one of the pictures from my sister.
Yeah.
She had a friend, and I was standing near one of these places, and they threw her on the truck, and she threw the picture down for me. She said, there is a picture of me and my sister. A young kid, she must have been 12 years old.
Now, these were people that were in the hospital,
Yeah.
and they took out, and they just
All the sick people.
and sorted them out. Now, you mentioned your husband. Of course, you weren't married then. It was someone you knew from the neighbor.
Yeah.
You knew him from the city?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we were from the same
Yeah.
neighborhood.
So you worked sometimes night shift, sometimes day shift?
Compensation. And my husband organized a quilt. Somewhere. Every time I came in, I had to look because people came in before me. They took the quilt. So we had no quilt. And we had these bugs, in the straw, these bugs. And I was sitting nights and crying. I couldn't fall asleep, but my sister was sleeping. So I used to sit with my hand and take them off of her face.
What kind of bugs were they?
They I don't know, from the flying things, like in
Yeah.
the morning I got up and like I had the measles.
Yeah.
They were sticking like.
Yeah.
But one time I came into the shower and I saw somebody was standing with a black body, and I just wanted to see who that is.
Yeah.
And this was my sister. And I fainted right in front of her. And she said, what happened? I said, oh, I just slept. Because she lost a lot of weight. So her body was all black. The skin was so black.
How did you protect yourself from the cold? You said you had just one dress. That was
I
it?
didn't. That's all what it is.
Yeah.
I walked from the shower to the factory and I had ice on my head. And I was frozen. But I came into the factory, it was warm. And
How many hours did you work in the factory?
we worked 8 hours, 10 hours,
Yeah.
whatever they wanted to do. Whenever they said it's finished,
Who owned that factory? Was it a German company?
yeah, a German company.
You know the name of the company? Is it?
Hassak. This was Hassak Pelzera. I don't know the name
Yeah.
of the company. There was a name, but
Yeah.
I don't remember. But the place was Hassak Pelzera. This
And
was the camp.
are they a company that's still in existence? Do you know?
I don't think so,
Yeah.
but I went back about 15 years ago. We went to Treblinka. I wanted to go to Auschwitz, Treblinka, Majdanek, Birkenau, and we stopped in Częstochow, and I wanted to go into the cemetery. And there is like a steel factory now, and we had to leave our passports. And one of the Polacks came out and he said, whatever the Germans didn't do to these graves, they just digged out the graves. Whatever they didn't do, he said the Polacks did. Because the Polacks said that the Jews were buried with gold teeth, with gold, whatever. So the Polacks did that. A Polak told us.
Now, the name of the company, Hassak, how would you spell that?
Hassak is Hassac.
And they met.
Pelzera.
Yeah, and they were manufacturing munitions with big shells, small
Big
bullets.
shells, big things.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we were, like, they have to check us going out if we don't take anything with us.
How about food while you were working?
Was no food. We got the bread, so we sliced it in slivers. Like everybody got the. If I worked at night, I was okay because I didn't want to eat. I couldn't eat, and
They give you soup or coffee or anything?
they gave us soup. So one time I passed by the kitchen, and I fainted from the smell. They cook like beets with the skin, with the sand, and sometimes with horse meat or something. Couldn't eat that. Couldn't eat that.
Now,
My sister for a while worked in the kitchen, so she came with a pot of soup.
yeah.
I don't know what the soup was, but I had a woman on top of me. And every time I asked her, don't put your shoes on top, because I had no hair. My sister gave me a haircut and I was without hair, because I couldn't wash my hair, my boys on my head. So I said to the woman, please don't put the shoes on top. I have no hair. And I was a kid. And she didn't do it, maybe for a whole year. One time my sister came from the kitchen with a hot pot of soup, and she put her feet down with the shoes, and I just threw it right on her. And my sister was yelling, she said, what do I need problems? We have enough problems. I just ran out.
Yeah.
She said that she's looking for me. Where is she gonna look for me? But since then, she never put her shoes on. That was it. And we had some in the barrack, and she had a good voice, so she started singing. Whatever we had in our hands, we threw on her.
Yeah.
Who wants to hear her sing? It was a hard thing to grow up, a teenager.
Were you close to anyone else in that camp besides your sister? Did you make
Yeah,
any
I
further
had
friends?
some cousins.
Yeah.
They lived then in Canada. They're not around anymore. I had a cousin in Milwaukee. They're not around anymore.
But these were cousins that you knew from the camp?
Cousins,
Yeah.
But we were together at home too.
Yeah.
In the same neighborhood.
Did you have any contact with the local population or workers who were not
No.
slave workers like yourself?
No.
Were there any other Poles there other than Jews who worked?
Yeah, there were some Poles and they worked in the camp.
Yeah.
They worked. And my husband had one. And he used to come in with a bike.
Mm-hmm.
And he used to put a sandwich in the seat of the bike. And he used to bring it to him. So that was a good thing too.
Now, the barracks that was in the same area as the factory, was that fenced in, or how was it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Were there were no other kind of prisoners but Jews in that?
Only Jews.
Yeah.
But the Polacks, they used to come in to work, like better work.
Yeah.
They had IDs when they come in, they worked out.
Do you remember any of the commanding officers or the guards that?
Yeah, there was one Stiglitz, a real murder. He used to walk around with a bat, and whoever he saw, he just smashed him right over the face, over the head. He didn't care. Yeah. Then I had mine, wasn't too bad. He was an American. I don't know.